Hi, and welcome to the Butterfly Effect, Transforming Legacy Documentation. My name is Polina Zaichkina. I'm a senior technical writer and I work for Codat. I produce and edit our public documentation, contribute to our OAS, look after the documentation portal, and enable my colleagues across the company to contribute to our docs. And Codat offers a suite of API-based products used by companies like banks, payment providers, and more to connect to the software that small businesses use. Products built with Codat can help small businesses with everything from accessing loans to keeping their vital systems in sync, or just removing the boring bits of day-to-day business admin. And last December, Codat and myself included decided to end the year with a bang by embarking on a docs transformation journey, which is what I will be talking to you about today. We kicked off a documentation transformation project that took us from this, as you can see, complex structure, loads of text, and this is what our docs used to look like a year ago. And we took it to this instead. And now let's see why we started this journey, what we learned from it, and why we think you can do it too. The decision to completely replace an existing documentation solution is usually a big one and usually has very strong reasons why underpinning it and brings with it a whole set of other challenges, even unexpected ones. And what's a presentation without a diagram? So for that purpose, I chose to represent the process of transforming documentation as a combination of changes to your tooling, changes to your team, changes to your process, and changes to your content, all are underpinned by the challenges that you're facing with your current documentation. We're going to look at Codat's why first. Initially, we used README as our CMS, but as the company and its needs grew and its strategy changed, it no longer suited our needs. Basically, in short, we outgrew README, we outgrew the CMS. There was a number of challenges we were facing with the status quo of our documentation, and we wanted to resolve them with a migration. Here's a quick rundown, and maybe some of these will resonate with you. We, first of all, had loads of information that we wanted to capture, and there was a specific way in which we wanted to organize it. And the out-of-the-box solution that we had simply did not support the information architecture that we desired. We also wanted to add richer content to our documents, but it wasn't easy to put into the CMS. So for example, something as crucial as diagrams, we had to embed as images of the diagrams rather than building out the diagrams themselves in the raw text so that they're available for editing later. We also wanted to collaborate more with our colleagues outside of technical writing, but we didn't have a straightforward, repeatable process for creating drafts and reviewing and approving them. And we were also limited by the number of admin seats available to us. So it meant all of the content in the company had to be produced by technical writers. There were just 4 of us, and we worked full-time on creating content just to manage with the volume of requests for changes and new content. And any attempts we could make to get the existing CMS to support what we wanted, even if it was partial, meant cost implications. Our spend would have had to grow to triple digits, in part due to the way we wanted to structure the information that we had. And so with that, we kind of felt stuck. We felt that working with a baseline and trying to improve it was pointless because we could never achieve what we wanted to achieve. And there wasn't much to improve, and we felt like we had nowhere to grow. So once we were clear on why we wanted to kind of move away from our legacy CMS to a new version of our docs, we looked within the team to understand what their available skills are. Luckily, we had engineering talent in the team. So what could possibly be the solution we would have gone for in this case? Well, of course, we chose to build a static docs website of our own and migrate over 400 pages of content in the space of just 4 weeks. As far as the solution is concerned, we write the raw content where we have in Markdown, we store it in GitHub, we use Docusaurus to build our static site, and then Vercel to deploy it. The site uses React and it's open source, so you can find the source repository on GitHub at coda-docs and contribute it if you would like to. We spent several weeks migrating the content and upskilling ourselves with the new tools, and after that, we started to enjoy the benefits of the move. We now have a lot more flexibility in what we can build and style. So this means that visually our documentation aligns with our product and marketing portals a lot more, and that gives the experience of a single landscape. We can also embed a lot more than we used to. So for example, we can now include interactive examples of suggested user interfaces in our tutorials. We can use embedded diagrams in the raw text. We use Mermaid for that. We also appreciate the key things that the docs as code approach entails, like being able to roll back changes or attribute them to specific users and timelines, retaining the full history of our knowledge base. We also embraced the pull request workflow that allows us to expand our pool of contributors and collaborate in the ways that we couldn't before. We now actually have around 30 people across Codat that regularly submit content for our docs. And overall, it required minimal upskill and buy-in. And we can honestly say that the entirety of Codat is behind our documentation, and we are tapping into the granular knowledge across the organization in real time. And since all of the changes follow the Git workflow, our contributors are extra confident. They know that their changes are always reviewed by a technical writer first. We also appreciate the build previews that we were able to get by using Bristol, where we can see what we will get as a result of the change. This led to a much better quality of updates, a better understanding of how docs architecture is organized, and generally it increased confidence as far as contributing goes, both from the technical writers and our colleagues outside of the tech content team. As a result, now actually we are a much smaller, more responsive team with a faster turnaround and a much wider range of skills. Of course, there were plenty of bumps and aha moments that we encounter along the way, and that's what I wanted to focus on today. Let's start with the challenge element of the transformation. There are 3 lessons that we learned here. First of all, be clear on your why. So you have to understand exactly what the issues are with your current documentation and what the problems are that you're trying to solve, and whether these can truly be solved by migration. So basically understand whether the migration is something you legitimately need and what kind of changes you're hoping to achieve as a result. You need to know where you're transforming from, so what your as-is state is, to your to-be state, and why you're doing it. This can be anything from cost considerations to business and product changes to a desire to simplify or align an existing documentation process. And once you're clear on that, you have to communicate these challenges to others. Of course, you will need to be able to allocate your work time towards this migration. So you will have to share the challenges and the concerns that you have with your stakeholders. You have to explain the value of the move. And perhaps it's not going to be just from a documentation perspective. It could be other contributing factors as well. So for example, for us, one of the reasons we looked at changing the architecture was because the company changed its business strategy, and what we would have needed to do with documentation to support this new product suite that we had just would not have been possible with the existing CMS. So for us, it was a case of, are we able to match the company strategy, or are we not able to do that? And so understanding that will help you get support from these stakeholders so you can actually spend the time on the migration that you will need to. And you might need to reiterate your reasons many times across different audiences, so be prepared. And finally, just take the plunge. If you identified the need for transformation, it's unlikely to go away on its own. Your existing solution will continue lagging behind your needs, and it will become a much harder, longer process if you were to revisit it later. You can do a big migration. You just need to have an idea of what you want. We also have learned a lot about ourselves and tooling during the docs transformation. So some advice that I'd like to highlight here is definitely leverage the skills you already have in your team or within the wider company if you have that support. Us technical writers have a multitude of talents, and we're usually quite keen to learn. So spend time with your tech writing colleagues to discuss the experiences that they've had and professional interests that they might be hiding, because you never know what you might find there and what sort of new opportunities it will open for you and your documentation. You also don't necessarily need engineering skills to implement your tool of choice. Do your research. There's so many options on the market that require minimal technical knowledge and provide templates for you to start with. For those of them that do have free trials, experiment, time box a few hours and see how far you can get with that tool in that time. And the right tool is going to be somewhere at the cross section of the skills that your team has and the problems that you want to solve. Codat's documentation had visual issues and problem with information architecture. So the solution that we had in mind for that required us to engineer some bespoke elements. Luckily, we did have engineering resources in the team, so we did take on that project. And finally, prepare to be annoyed. Moving from one tool to another might not be a very seamless experience, especially if you're moving from a what you see is what you get editor to something that works with raw markdown like we did. For example, the way README created admonitions and tables didn't really translate into a syntax that Docusaurus could support. So we spent quite a bit of time fixing those manually before we discovered Markdown Table Generator, which basically allows you to copy what you see is where you get tables and get a markdown syntax out of that. So save yourself some anguish and have a look in advance at the tools that could help you migrate. The changes to the tooling naturally led to process changes as well. I'd say they are likely to lag behind the changes to your tooling, but do start early if you can. First and foremost, do ask others for help. We relied quite a bit in the first couple of weeks of migration on our colleagues across product and engineering just to get through the volume of changes that needed to happen, like cleaning up the formatting, fixing broken links, etc. Also, remember that technical writers often support others, so now get others to support technical writing. Generally, documentation should be a shared responsibility because it's not something that exists on its own. It's part of the product that your company sells. Therefore, it should be shared responsibility that you would need to share with your product peers as well. It's in their best interest to make sure that their product is represented in the best possible way in the documentation. So this is where the expectation for their support comes from. Then see how your new tools can support a change in process. So for us, for example, we were looking for a review and approval process that would allow others to collaborate on documentation more. And so being able to implement the Docs Code approach allowed us to do that. And finally, we recommend that you collaborate and enable. So all of these people that you look for help from and that you would like to share the documentation responsibility with, provide content and architectural guidance to them so that they know what sort of standards you have, what is the style guide that you're using for documentation, what is the tone of voice that people are meant to be using, just so that they're clear and they can give you the best inputs and be the best collaborators that they can be. There is, of course, changes to the content that happen during a migration or like a legacy transformation process as well. Migration would usually involve a full audit of your docs. I can't imagine a scenario in which you don't look at the entirety of the content that you have while trying to figure out how to take it from one place and put it into another. So it's a perfect time for you to understand what you have and identify potentially opportunities for improvement. While you're looking at that, make sure you record any sort of feedback or ideas that you get or snags that you see or improvements that you're thinking of. If there is like minor improvements that can be done as you go along, feel free. Otherwise, do keep a clear record and then have a plan to get back to it and follow through that list at a later stage. Play around with the content in the new tool as well. So iterate and experiment on what it's going to look like. So even though, for example, we had an idea of what our information architecture is going to look like, so what is going to be the new navigation, the new set of pages, how the information is going to flow from one place to another, actually building it out and seeing what it looks like physically in the new tool showed us some additional opportunities for improvement, and in the end gave us a much better result because we could sort of touch and play with the content and then make it even better at the end. Then make sure to arrange and communicate a documentation freeze because obviously for you to be able to launch a new documentation solution, that means you need to be able to pause the old solution at some point and start with a new one. So also be ready for double maintenance at that point. It's quite likely that you would need to make updates to both versions of your docs in the old tool and the new tool while the changeover is happening. Or potentially you might have the new documents live at the same time as the old ones for a while, just so that there is something to fall back on. And I guess the key piece of advice there is, apart from tracking very clearly what sort of changes you have been making to the docs, is to avoid making changes that might become relevant. So things like styling, potentially little typos, icons, graphics, things like that. If they're not completely out of date and you're just looking to improve them, this might not be the best time. If a change is required to make sure that the public documentation is actually accurate to what the product functionality is, then it's definitely a change that you need, and you're likely to have to double maintain it across your old documentation solution and the new one. And finally, all of those changes, they do also lead to changes in your team. Technical writers generally can do a lot more than just write. We have so many other ideas. We're able to learn new skills, and we are also editors. We're enablers for other people. We're historians of what the like previous history of the documentation is and what the plans are. We also build a strategy out for the documents, and we're also tutors as we support others in creating the best content that they can as well. So for us, we ended up moving away from being like a siloed technical writing team. We now work a lot more across our engineering, our product colleagues. Um, and our role ended up being a lot more of a stewardship sort of role and an editing sort of role and a guiding sort of role, rather than just us producing content 24/7 on demand. So it's no longer that we get stuff thrown at our backlog that we need to process. We now collaborate a lot more together with our colleagues, which always leads to much better mood for technical writers and better quality of content as a result as well. New tooling usually also means that you'd need to develop new skills. So expect and embrace upskilling that will likely come out of a documentation migration process. But first, obviously, decide if upskilling is even right for your team. That probably ties into the beginning with the challenges that you're facing. Just make sure that documentation migration and transformation is indeed what you need and what you're looking for. And if it is, I think you'll see that you'll reap plentiful benefits as a result of that, like we did. So, for example, for us, we are no longer just team tech writing, we're also team tech content. So, it's not just a technical writer that's there. We also have a product designer, and we have a developer experience manager and a customer experience director. To kind of look after all of the aspects of the public facing documentation, not just the text itself, but also any sort of videos, visuals, embeds, tutorials that we might be producing, demo apps, code snippets, and so on. So that helped us, having that variety of skill set in the team helped us create a much richer and more accurate content than we used to have. The whole process of migration also helped highlight the importance of documentation. First of all, by us demonstrating the effort that was put in to make that happen. And then also, once we asked other people to start getting involved and contributing, collaborating on the corrections that we're looking for, people have truly appreciated the volume of content we have and the sort of quality of content that we produce. And our new docs have received plenty of compliments from our clients, which is also a great way to demonstrate the value of the migration that we did. And we now, as Team Tech Content, as I mentioned, no longer just accept incoming work from other teams. We are more like steering the ship as far as documentation is concerned. So it's a lot more of a collaborative process that we have more control over. We're now involved in the decision making. We get involved at a much earlier stage, sometimes even during the design of specific features. And we truly believe that that collaboration was also increased because of the shared responsibility for the docs that we now have across the company. That also helped us identify cost-saving opportunities. And generally, we now work much faster as a much smaller team. So smaller tweaks are much quicker to do now, and even the large-scale changes, they can be done faster. Plus, you don't have to interrupt the existing user experience because the changes to the documentation happen without any impact on what's currently public and live, even to the point where we can tweak separate single pages to make them either available for public viewing or not available for public viewing, or even searchable in the search of the docs, which is not the granularity that we used to have before. And finally, you might want to know, after all of the hard work that we've put in so far already this year, what's next for us? Well, we are planning to continue improving the legacy content of our docs, and we will continue enhancing our documentation to be more developer oriented. So for example, we now rely a lot more on code snippets and SDKs within our docs, which is not an element that we used to be able to include. We're also looking to continue increasing the variety of content types. As I mentioned, we now rely a lot more on video content, and some of the more interactable elements as well. And we're also looking to add some custom functionality to the pages, for example, being able to raise tickets from within documentation or create order forms and so on. And that's it of the transformation of Codat's legacy documentation. Thank you.